it's Mo. It is time to do another basement box unboxing, unhaul and haul. I'm here with Irving today. I have my notebook. This huge pile, please ignore for the most part behind me, but the majority of this pile is actually books that I have collected over the last couple of weeks since I have filmed one of these that were on my TBR or that were around the house that need to go in a box to go in the basement because I have been putting books down there as we've been going. If you have not seen one of my basement box unboxings, haul and unhaul, this is where I go through the boxes of books that have been in my basement since we moved into our house in 2015 and go through them and try to decide if they're books that I want to keep, if they're books that I want to put back in the basement. Ideally, I would like to be unhauling the vast majority of these books, and then also some of the books end up on my TBR. I have read at least 4 at this point of the books from my basement box books that went on the TBR. So I am reading the books that are going on my TBR, which is good. Today we have a little bit of a weird one. I have one big box of books from the basement that has not been touched in a very long time, but I also have a bag of books that my dad gave me recently that he was getting rid of. I thought we could go through that. And then I have half a box of books that I found that was also from my dad, but it's been sitting kind of covered up in the upstairs of my house for the last 6 months or more. That box would have ended up in the basement if I had let it get that far. I think it's going to be mostly vintage sci-fi. These boxes have a lot of vintage sci-fi in them because my dad is getting rid of his collection of vintage sci-fi and we are taking some of them and the rest we're getting rid of. They also usually have a lot of Sherlock books in them, Sherlock Holmes books, because our friend very kindly gave me a lot of Sherlock Holmes books. I have been able to read some of the Sherlock Holmes books that I found in these boxes for Holmes for the Holiday, which was a readathon way back in February. I am reading some of them, but I'm not unfortunately going to be able to get to the vast majority of the Sherlock Holmes books that I was given. So let's go through the bag first because the bag's going to be loud and annoying, so we'll do that. First, we have 2 books by Dan Simmons. This is Hard as Nails and Hard Freeze. And I know that we also got the first book in this series as well because these are books that my father had duplicates of, but he thought my husband might like. They're kind of like hard-boiled detective espionage / ex-cop, like Reacher sort of kind of books because my dad knows that my husband likes the Reacher books, or hate read some of the Reacher books, really. But so these I'm not going to get rid of. I'm going to leave these. My husband took the first one to see if he was going to like them. So if he does want these, we'll keep them. If not, we'll probably unhaul all 3. Next, we have a paperback copy of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I tried to get my dad to read this. I don't know why he had this and hasn't read it, but I have a hard copy version of this already. I haven't actually read this book yet, but I've heard so many amazing things about it. It's a nonfiction book. This is one that I feel like someone would love, like someone specific, so I might keep this one and then find the right person for it. But it's basically going on the unhaul pile because we don't need to keep it. I already have a hardcover copy of that. Next, we have An Unsuitable Job for a Woman by P.D. James. I do love P.D. James. She's my favorite mystery author, and so I will be keeping this version. I have a mass market paperback version of this book, and I have already read An Unsuitable Job for a Woman. This is the first in her Cordelia Gray detective series. I think there's only 3 books in that. The detective series that she's more well known for, and she wrote many more books in, was the Adam Dalgliesh series, which I have been working my way through. I plan on, after reading all of the Adam Dalgliesh stories, moving on to the Cordelia Gray because I've only ever read this first one. Oh, well, I guess the font is pretty small. This is just such a short version. The mass market paperback I have is really big. But this is going to go on my red shelf, but it's going to go in my P.D. James section, so that's really all you need to know. Here is another P.D. James book. This is The Private Patient. This is actually the last Adam Dalgliesh book, I believe. I have already read this one. and I do already own a hardcover copy, this exact copy. If it was a different copy from the one I owned, I might keep it, but because it's one I already own, we can unhaul it. And then the last in the bag is Lawrence Shames' The Naked Detective, which I don't know anything about. It's very short, seems kind of cute. Let's read a little bit about this one. Well, it's set in Key West. It is about a detective who was not meant to be a detective, but I guess who's naked. It's only 225 pages. I think I'll keep this one. I'll keep it out. I'll put it on my TBR. March Mystery Madness is coming up, so maybe I will end up reading it. And if I don't, then I could always unhaul it. So that's the first one we're keeping. We're going to put it on the TBR. Now on to this box that I have. And like I said, I think these are mostly vintage sci-fi. The first one is The Corridors of Time by Poul Anderson. Poul Anderson is a vintage sci-fi author that my husband really likes, so I keep all the Poul Anderson ones. Paul. What I Did Tomorrow by L.P. Davis. Most of the vintage sci-fi, I have to see what they're about because I have no idea. This one does sound cool because it's about time travel and it's like a murder mystery, but I don't know, I'm not that interested in it. I've never heard of it before, so I think we can let that one go. The next book is Gordon Eklund, Beyond the Resurrection, vintage cover. I always say if I were keeping them based on cover alone, I would keep like every single one of these. This is about a futuristic school in the year 2004. So it tells you a little bit about how old this book is. It's a high school where like everyone's doing great, but there's a mutant. Sounds kind of interesting, so I'm going to keep this one, but I'm going to put it back in the basement box books. Noted science fiction writer-editor William F. Nolan edits and presents The Human Equation, provocative short stories of tomorrow by Alfred Bester, Lee Brackett, Ray Bradbury, Philip K. Dick, and John D. MacDonald with authoritative biographical preferences, whatever that means. I don't think we need to keep this one. It seems interesting. I would read Philip K. Dick and I would read Ray Bradbury, but I have a feeling you can probably find these short stories in any collection of short stories. And I have a lot of vintage sci-fi collections that I have never read and that just end up in the basement. Next we have Call Me Ishtar by Rhonda Lerman, which is not a reference to the movie Ishtar, but it makes me think of the movie Ishtar. Do you like and sometimes want to keep especially vintage sci-fi written by women, but this one really doesn't sound super interesting. It sounds like a goddess woman mother coming back from the future to tell the world that they're, destroying it. I feel like we get enough of that in real life. I don't necessarily need to read a sci-fi about it. Next we have City of Darkness, a novel by Ben Bova. I can tell from the cover already, I don't like it. I don't like the cover. I don't like the kids. This seems to be about a future time when Manhattan is deserted and everyone has moved out of the slums of Manhattan and then one person is stuck there. That does sound really interesting to me, but I don't foresee myself reading this anytime soon, so I think we can unhaul it. Next we have Medusa's Children by Bob Shaw. This says something alien was invading the seas of Earth. This seems to be about shipwrecks and people who are lost in ships turning basically into mermaids and living aquatically, which is similar to what The Deep by River Solomon is about. So that would kind of be interesting. I mean, I'm sure this one has much less thought put into the idea of slave ships and people who were killed during the slave trade than that book, but it could be interesting to read this one and kind of compare it. It's very short. This is The Year of the Rats. That's a cool title and a very cool cover by Barbara Gignon Ricci. Again, this one, it seems to be about a future where the United States and the world has become so destroyed by climate change and by pollution and waste that people can only live in certain specific areas, and those areas are run by fat cat corporations. So, basically today, only a little bit worse. So again, this is one, although it sounds really interesting, is not one that I see myself reading anytime soon, so I think we can go ahead and unhaul this one as well. This is Michael Chabon's A Model World and Other Stories. So Michael Chabon, I believe, is the same author of Cavalier and Clay and a bunch of other of those books. This one must be a fairly early one, and it is a book of his short stories. I have never read a book by him that I know of. I do have a couple of books by his. Yeah, these were written in the mid-80s, or two in 1990. So I'm not really interested in this one. I like that it has the phases of the moon along the cover and the back, but I don't think I need to read that one. Here is The Sands of Mars, a novel by Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke is another one of those that I've never read, but my husband has read and he liked it, so we might as well keep this in the basement box books. Here is an anthology of Jewish fantasy and science fiction, Wandering Stars, edited by Jack Dan. This has Isaac Asimov, Carol Carr, Robert Silverberg, Pamela Sargent, Harlan Ellison, and a bunch of other people. Very cool graphic-y cover. This reminds me of Axum's Edge, the sci-fi book which was written a few years ago. I've never read that book, but the cover kind of looks like that, doesn't it? I don't need this book. We can unhaul it. Next we have Crime Prevention in the 30th Century, edited by Hans Steven Stetson. This is, I assume, a collection of short stories. Yes. Miriam Alfred DeFord, Harry Harrison, Anne McCaffrey. So I think futuristic crime, sci-fi. That sounds cool, but again, gonna let it go. The penultimate book from that box is Star Mother by Sydney J. Van Scoik. Cool vintage cover for sure. Seems like a sci-fi fantasy, not really interested in that. And then lastly, we have Carter's Paradise by Malcolm Levine. This one seems to be about a futuristic prison and a prison riot that happens there. Definitely not something that I'm interested in, so we will go ahead and unhaul this one as well. In that bag and box, which if we're counting is the 21st box that I've opened, we have 4 books that are going back in the basement box books. We have 1 book that's going on the TBR. We have 3 we'll call maybes. We are giving away, we're gonna give to somebody these. My husband's gonna check on and see if he wants. And then we have 11 unhauls. This next box is packed to the brim. It's not a huge box, but it has a lot of stuff in it. So get ready, is all I'm saying. The first book that I see is a Sherlock Holmes mystery magazine. We've had quite a few of these in these boxes, and I have been getting rid of every single one of them. If there was someone who was a contributor who I wanted to read, I might keep them, but for now they are getting unhauled. Then we have Investigating Firefly and Serenity, a science fiction on the frontier. Is this an essay collection? It's edited by Rhonda V. Wilcox and Tanya R. Cochran. This is probably one that I bought because I do love Firefly. This was written in 2008. Seems to be all like essays, not short fiction. I think I would keep this one and put it back in the basement. This seems like one that I might never read, but I kind of want to read. Here is a vintage sci-fi. Looks like it came from my dad. It is Isaac Asimov by Jupiter and Other Stories. We'll keep this one. We'll put it back in the basement. Michael Palin Diaries, 1969 to 1979, the Python years. So this is a epistolary book, all really Michael Palin's diaries from that time. Super interesting, and it has some photographs and such. This one we'll definitely keep, but also put back in the basement. Here is one that I don't know what to do with. This is The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. This is one that I know that I've read. I do not remember at all. I have thought about rereading. I see a lot in little free libraries. Will I ever reread this like massive middle grade series? Like, will I ever reread this? Probably not. I think I'm gonna go ahead and unhaul it. There is one of the weirder things that I found in a book, a nail in this book. So we're gonna go ahead and unhaul it because I feel like I could always find that again if I really decide that I want to read it. Story Poems, an anthology of narrative verse selected and edited by Louis Untermeyer. This seems to be long poems, short stories by various by various poets. These boxes are very dry. I'm like very dry in this one. This seems cool, but I'm not going to put it in my poetry section because I'm not going to get to it anytime soon. I will be keeping it down in the basement. Next we have Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. So this is one actually that I might have on my want to read list. So I'm going to keep this one. This one might go on the TBR. A great copy of 1984 by George Orwell. I have never read this book. I think I might have already found a copy of this book and put it down in the basement, but we're going to go ahead and put this one in the basement too because I can't remember. Here is a very cool Harlequin romance, The Island of Pearls by Margaret Rome. This is just a great old Harlequin romance, sprayed edges, very cool. Oh my god, it says many English girls go to Mallorca for their holiday in the secret hope of meeting romance. That does kind of sound amazing. I'm going to put this in a maybe pile. Here's a cool vintage copy of Cyrano de Bergerac. You never know when you might want to read that one. I think you can stay in the basement. Here's a copy of Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This is the 100th anniversary copy. I don't like this cover. It's pretty creepy. I don't ever see myself reading this book either. So I think we're going to unhaul it. It's cool. Earth's Hidden Mysteries, Accounts of Mankind's Unsolved Puzzles by Carrie Cohan. This seems like a very cool book. Neat to have because it's vintage and it has some interesting pictures. I think that one can go in the basement. Oh, here's Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain to go with Huckleberry Finn. This is a cooler vintage cover though. I'm gonna put both of these back in the maybe pile actually. Michael Moorcock's The Final Program. Totally amazing, not safe for work cover. Completely fantastic, but I won't show it. I'm definitely keeping this one. I read my first Michael Moorcock actually from these basement box books, so I'm interested in reading more of his work. Here's a great vintage copy of A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I kept another copy of this to put on my shelves, so I think what I'm going to do is keep this one. Maybe it'll go on the shelf, or maybe I will swap out the better cover. This one has sprayed edges. I'm not sure which one's going to be better, so we're definitely going to keep this one. I have read this or been read this or been read or I have been read this. I have read A Wrinkle in Time when I was young, or I have been read it when I was young. So I think I'm fine keeping it on my shelves, but it might be something that I reread. And here is A Wizard of Earthsea, a great vintage cover. Definitely going to keep this, but this can go in the basement. I think I do have a copy of this either on my TBR or on my red shelf. I have not read very much Ursula K. Le Guin, but she is an author I would like to read more of. Here is a P.G. Wodehouse, A Damsel in Distress. Definitely keeping all P.G. Wodehouses. This isn't part of the Worcester series. I've only read the Bertie Wooster books, but I definitely would keep this one and I'll keep it in the basement. Here's a copy of The Bell Jar. We actually got rid of a copy of The Bell Jar in one of these because it was all ripped and didn't have a cover. This I think is the exact same edition, but with a cover. You can put it in the basement. Here is The Fabulous Riverboat by Philip Posey Farmer. I really like Philip Posey Farmer as a vintage sci-fi author, and this one is part of the Riverworld series. I don't think I've read this one, but this one can just go on the shelf and it can go with my Philip Posey Farmer collection, especially because it's a pretty cool vintage cover. Although probably a little racist. The Magician's Elephant by Kate DeCameo with illustrations by Yoko Tanaka seems to be a middle grade book. It does have beautiful illustrations, but I am not going to read this. It can go in the unhaul pile. This is Love at First Flight, written in 1943. Old copy, very neat, by Charles Spalding and Otis Carney. This seems to be a young adult novel or possibly a middle grade, and it seems to be about like a war and the Second World War. I don't think I want this. I'm going to put this in the maybe pile. Here we have Whale Rider by Witi Ihimara. This is a New Zealand author, an Indigenous New Zealand author, and the person who was reading this got this far into it. I can't tell if this is like a young adult novel, if this is a middle grade novel, or if this is an adult novel. I think it's worth keeping. I know this was made into a movie. This could be interesting just because it is a Maori writer. I read my first Maori writer who was a poet last year, and it was really interesting, so I will keep this, and I think I'm going to go ahead and put it on the TBR. It's a cool vintage copy of Hawthorne's stories. I've never read any Nathaniel Hawthorne, but if I want to read it, I have a copy. And then we have Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. This is short fictions and illusions. I do like Neil Gaiman, so I would keep this. I don't read a lot of his work, but I am a huge fan of Good Omens, and I did like American Gods as well, if I ever get the urge. I have quite a few Neil Gaiman books in my basement box book. The Best Short Stories of Anton Chekhov is a confusing one. Oh god, it's so dry. I've talked about it before in these videos, but I'm not a huge Russian author. I believe he's a Russian author reader, but a short story collection might be interesting. I'm going to put this in the maybes. Here's an amazing vintage cover of Planet of the Whispers. We just have to keep it because of the cover. This is The Italian Secretary, Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Caleb Carr. He is the author of The Alienist. So The Alienist I've had in my possession and I've unhauled. It's super long and it's not something that I've been interested in. But this is one that could be cool if it's like a Sherlock Holmes adaptation, Sherlock Holmes retelling. I think I'm going to keep this one, and I kept one other Sherlock Holmes book and put it in a try-a-chapter. So I'm going to put this one with that one and try-a-chapter both these and then decide if I want to keep it or not. Here is Grave Site by Charlene Harris. I believe this is one of her series about ghosts. I have read all the True Blood, or I think almost all the True Blood books before. I went through a Charlene Harris phase. I am no longer in that phase. I think her books are totally fluffy, totally fun, and someone would love to find one in a little free library. Here's 101 Magic Tricks by somebody Adams. This is an amazing little vintage magic book. I will keep this and put it in the basement. D.H. Lawrence Sex, Literature, and Censorships essays, including Lawrence's own defense of Lady Chatterley's lover. I definitely don't need to keep this, but this does seem like a cool vintage copy. Wow, here's a copy of Rosemary's Baby. So I kind of knew that we were going to find Rosemary's Baby in here eventually. I knew that I had at least one copy of this. This is a very beat up vintage copy. The sprayed edges are like coming off. It's like all ripped. I read Ira Levin's The Stepford Wives last year. Yeah, last year, and I loved it. I thought it was so good. It almost made my top books of the year. So I'm definitely going to be keeping this one, and I will put it on the TBR. This is Piers Anthony, Thousand Star. I've read one or two Piers Anthony books, and I remember liking them, but they are definitely like sci-fi fantasy. I don't think I need to keep this one. Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny is a Hugo Award Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year. This one looks very cool. I have given away a lot of Zelazny, but I've kept some, so I will keep this one and put it in the basement. I'm more of a sucker, really, for vintage paperbacks, mass market paperbacks, than I am for vintage hardcovers. Motorman by David Obel. Cool vintage cover. Very creepy. I was gonna say pass on this one, but the author is from New Orleans, so I will put it back in the basement. Here's another Michael Moorcock, The Hollow Lands. Very interesting cover. That can go in the basement. Then we have The Heart of the Matter by Graham Greene. I keep all Graham Greene books. I really, really like Graham Greene. I'm actually kicking myself because I saw an amazing vintage copy of Travels with My Aunt, and I didn't pick it up, and I should have just got it. But anyway, this one I will definitely keep, but I will put in the basement. Here's a copy of Justine by the Marquis de Sade. I don't know if we have seen a copy of this before, but this one is very small and cute. I've never read it. I think it's like very risque or something. We can keep that in the basement. Here's another and perhaps the most famous of the Roger Zelazny books. My Name is Legion. I don't know what this is about, but it has a cool vintage cover. It says, "He did not exist, or did he?" I think we'll keep that one. Return to Mars by Edmund Hamilton. One man of Earth battles 1,000 stars to save our century from the far future. Ooh. This one is very cool. Has a very cool cover, but I think we can pass it on. Next we have Seven Gothic Tales by Isak Dinesen. I don't love this edition. I think we've seen this one before, but I can't be sure. So I'm going to keep it and put it back in the basement. This is The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. I have never read any Joseph Conrad, but this one does sound interesting to me. A precursor to the espionage thrillers of such writers as Graham Greene and John le Carre. I think this one's worth keeping for now. Oh, this one's cool. Very cool, very vintage cover. The Fourth Galaxy Reader, 15 imaginative stories that probe beyond the range of the swiftest traveling rocket. Not too many people in this that I'm interested in, but just because these these are like smaller than mass market paperback. They're so cool. Another Ursula K. Le Guin, The Word for World is Forest. I've heard really good things about this actually, and this is an amazing vintage copy, but it can go in the basement. Stay in the basement. That box had 44 books in it. That is a lot of books. We are putting 26 books back in the basement. Some of the maybes I decided on putting back there too, so actually it's 28 books. We are unhauling 8 of those books, and we are putting 3 on the TBR, 1 as a try a chapter, a couple of books that are going on the red shelf, and that's it. So that is box 22 of the Basement Box books. I have at least 5 more books, I think, down there, possibly more that I haven't found yet. So we will be back another day to look at more Basement Box books. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. Let me know any of the books that you saw I should prioritize. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!